You know, always excited to be a part of something that hopefully leaves a trail and motivates and inspires our young people as well as our old people. Barry Accius, I will say that I am a father first, founder of Voice of the Youth since 2008. Like to say that I've been a leader or been a part of a lot of movements that have been pushed here locally as well as nationally. Of course, here in Sacramento, I don't think that until myself and some others really pushed a hard line when we talk about this thing called activism to another level, that some of the conversations, especially the Black issues, were even brought to light. So I would like to say a lot of that change happened in 2013 when we looked at the Trayvon Martin situation. That was kind of the pregame before 2014 with Mike Brown, as well as eventually having a national moment in 2018 with Stephon Clark. And I think that really catapulted a lot of things that you see right now when we talk about equity and we talk about no changes and investing in Black communities. Haven't really happened as much or in the grandiose way that I would like, but we'll get into that conversation a little bit later. So, folks nowadays, I think, look at activism as a way in, but activism to me, and when I say a way into, you know, some political endeavor, some agenda that they're pushing, some sense of relevancy. I think I have to say that because I got to be very clear that activist looks different from when it was once upon a time with our ancestors when they activated their activism, as I like to say, to propel the issues that they were dealing with, to fight against an oppressive system that we still have to fight against, compared to now. Unfortunately, I think that a lot of activism is not met with the same kind of resilience or what I would like to say, same kind of resilience, as well as the same kind of ability to stay focused on the end game and the overall goal. I say that because a lot more folks who get into activism feel like it's more of a trendy thing to do. If you pay attention to a lot of folks that may march when it's a trending topic, George Floyd is a huge, look into that, where with activism, you have to understand once you get in, the work never stops. Marching and protesting is a part of the awareness tools, but the reality is that's the start. The real work starts when you start implementing the change, when things aren't as trendy, and when you are now diving into solutions for the problem that you exposed. And a lot of folks, when it comes down to it, only like to do the marching and the protesting. When the lights, cameras, and action is off, when there's not 200 to 300, 400, or maybe even more coming to a protest, fighting for, what we need to fight against, which is an oppressive system of white supremacy, and to liberate all people that are oppressed. I think that when you fall short into the ideas of looking at short-term to long-term planning and goals, you can't look at trending topics, because anything that's happened when we've activated our activism, when you talk about George Floyd, you talk about Breonna Taylor, you have to be reminded, you have to fast forward into Mike Brown, Sandra Bland, and Eric Gardner, and all of those other folks, and even before them, Emmett Till. You got to consider that these paths of activism, right, are founded from something that happened prior to. So as many people jumped up on the bandwagon of George Floyd, the flaw in that is, what did we really get out of that? outside of the exposing of a system that many of us already knew was corrupted. Many people will say that some police officers got fired, and as we know, one police officer got convicted and sentenced. But the true reality is that we've had police officers fired, and we've had police officers convicted, right? But shadowing that thought process is because you just get into the point of not really understanding the framework of where we're at in moving us forward. You would think that that was a big victory. In reality, when you understand history, you will say that wasn't victory, that wasn't justice, that was what was supposed to happen. That's called accountability. Because, mind you, the same oppressive system that we're fighting against, it still remains. So activism is never about one individual person, or at least when I look at it, it's never about one individual or one moment. It's about systemic problems. So when you are thinking and figuring about how you want to jump in activism, one thing you have to do is ask yourself, what are you trying to change? What kind of impact are you trying to make in your community or for the people affected? What kind of difference are you looking to culminate from what you're doing? What are you really actually doing this for? Are you bored? Do you just have some time on your hand? Do you feel conflicted? Are you moving with guilt? Do you not want this type of thing to happen to you or your family? Or you're activated by the tragedy that's connected you to this situation? Because a lot of activism currently has been activated by folks, family members who have been triggered or who are right in the midst of why we're actually protesting, why we're actually marching. As you see so many of the police brutality and family members then becoming activists without having really historical information, or just kind of being thrown in. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. But I would suggest for everybody on this Zoom to make sure you study, right? Make sure you study on the issues. Make sure you study some of the great activists of our times. Make sure you're in the loop of understanding historical practices, so you don't put your foot in your mouth thinking and believing that you are the only one and that you're doing something so profound. Because some of the most profound acts of activism haven't happened currently, and I won't argue the fact if it happened with Black Lives Matter. I would probably say it didn't. It happened way before. And I think that the trial by error is not recognizing ancestors that even allowed us to be so courageous. And I would say that because in a form of activism, one of the major feats of activism, we talk about history, when MLK called for the protest, the bus protest. And the reason why that was successful, but at the same particular time, the reason why it had some errors was you had a united front of African Americans that said for almost a whole year, for a whole year and some change, not taking the bus. That creates what? An economic wedge to the people that you are engaging with to change some of the policies, to change some of the systems that have oppressed Black people, right? So policies change, ideology change. Some people want to just talk about it, that it was like about Black people riding on buses, and a lot of folks will pinpoint it at Rosa Parks. But if you know history, that she wasn't the only catalyst into that, even though she gets all the accolades. But the real reason why the Montgomery bus protest, the boycott worked, is because you really had individuals unified, set, and nobody was crossing the line. And if you decided to cross the line, right, our white counterparts at that particular time will let you know Negro, you do know that you're in a boycott. You do know that. So that was really successful, but the reason why it missed the mark, as well as being so successful, it still missed the mark, right? We're talking about when you boycott something and you crumbled it economically, you're showing your economic power by not supporting that and knowing that they needed our support. African Americans should have invested more in their own bus system, because now, once you create another system of power, because you've already seen what you've done, unified by breaking a system economically, creating that alternative is what should have been the next stage, not negotiating and saying, well, thank you, we appreciate you letting us ride in front of the bus, blase, blah, and all the other things. I'll say that is one of the major faults that we had moving in, that we did not create our own bus systems. So when we look at structurally how a lot of activism of late has impacted our communities, I have to really question, because there hasn't been really major laws changed. There has been some slight wins. There hasn't really been some major policy change. There has been some slight wins. So a lot of it, to be honest with you, currently has really not moved the needle as far as it needs to be. When we look at activism, if we're talking about moving forward for the young activists that want to come up, you cannot fall into the trends of what others have done before you. Like I said, the great part about the Montgomery bus boycott, they unified over a year or so. They were able to not go on buses. Economically, they created a great distaste for our white counterparts, but eventually they went back to the same system. So with George Floyd, it's almost as if we protested, we raged against the machine, and now we're right back into the same system that we raged against the machine again. So there has to be, when we're activating our activism and we're trying to change structure, this idea that a lot of folks have about we need a seat at the table. Well, we got plenty of Black people at the table. And though we don't have a lot of seats, there's enough. And we're still in the same position that we're in. So when we're activating our activism, you have to ask yourself, identify where we were historically and where we are now. Some Black people will say, we're in a great place. Maybe. But you have to understand, why are we in a great place? The reason why we're in a great place is because we are allowed to make millions and millions of dollars. And a lot of the millions and millions of dollars that we are allowed to make are dollars that come off our own ignorance. You look at the music industry. That's ignorant personified. That's not all the music industry. I'm just saying a bulk of it. You look at our athletes. Our athletes spoke out about Black Lives Matter when initially they were almost forced, because the whole world was watching. And they're looking at the Black athletes. So what are you guys going to do? But after, what have you seen moving forward? I ain't heard not one NBA player talk about Black Lives Matter or any other the systemic issues that we've had, because we still got them. They've gone nowhere. So our truth in identifying, right, what culminates change is if we feel that we are in a system that doesn't look at us as equal. My thing is separating from that system. Blacks have been in this domestic violence relationship with white America for far too long for us to continue to, whenever they give us a carrot and dangle in our face, we end up biting. All across America, you can look at Black leadership and you can look at failures in Black communities. Here in Sacramento, right here, Sacramento, once upon a time, we had 4 black male city council members. Equating 4 black male city council members, that should equate to power. Ask yourself in 2021, do black people have power currently? Ask yourself in 2021, do black people have major infrastructure? Ask yourself in 2021, do black people have majority stakehold businesses, their own community that does not look like a hood or a ghetto or food desert? And mind you, in Sacramento, we had 4 black city council members. That should equate to power, but that equated to symbolic gestures of progress. So moving in the shape of activism, it's not just grabbing a bullhorn. It's just not showing up to your latest. What about Kevin Johnson said about that? Well, yeah, what about Kevin Johnson? Ask yourself, what about Kevin Johnson? You guys have to understand something. Like, when you resonate power and change, black people shouldn't have to be begging for nothing. The Jews don't beg. The Asians don't beg. The Middle Easterns don't beg. And you got to look at all these folks considered immigrants. Jews, they all are their power basis is owning a majority of this stuff, as well as Asians here in Sacramento have their own economic base. So even with the Asian crime against Asians spike, they ultimately, because of their power structure, were able to activate their activism. And in 2.5 seconds, there was law in place to protect Asians. Tell me the law in place that's there to protect blacks. I'll wait. And so that's what we talk about, galvanizing power structure, right? They'll give us a black police chief. They'll give us a black mayor. They'll give you a black governor. And when you look upon all of these spaces and places, Chicago right now got a black superintendent, a black DA, a black mayor, and Chicago right now with gun violence is totally off the hook. You do not want to be in Chicago. Atlanta, black mayor, Atlanta, totally off the hook. So I want to make sure that we connect power and activism, because when we are marching and protesting and calling out folks and saying that this cause is worthy of us to be involved with, saying that there's these issues in our community that we want to gravitate to, we can never line one issue. When you're an activist, you want to circle them all together because they all are connected. It's a domino effect. Police brutality speaks upon the poverty in our community, speaks upon the violence in our community, and it speaks upon the lack of resources in our community. Why? Because those police officers will come to our community, violate us before they go to more suburb communities that are majority white. Just recently, Sacramento put out some data about, and I had an interview with KCRA3 and CBS News 13, and we were talking about it. And one of the alarming statistics was African Americans make 13%, 13.1% of the population, right? And we got pulled over. Y'all get ready for it. 38%. Our white counterparts make what? 33% of the population in Sacramento? And they got pulled over 29%. You mean we got pulled over more with less people? So when we try to raise the scale of activism, this report comes out, they want me to be surprised. They want some people that have done the work, like I have, to be surprised. But we've been telling y'all racism is in the core of policing here in Sacramento, without a shadow of a doubt. I don't need no statistics to tell me that. This is the same thing that we've been fighting for. Outside of just fighting for Black people to be liberated against police brutality, there's more to fight against outside of police killing us. Systematically, we are being killed, and then in turn, we are creating genocide on ourselves because we're in this rat race, not understanding that our unity with like-minded minds and people that look like us, as well as certain allyship that can move the needle. I'm gonna talk about those white woke allies in a second, because I think we have a few too many white woke allies that is doing the same exact thing we do in marching, protesting, screaming at people. White woke allyship should always be white woke allyship that can move directions of change in places Black people cannot move. Conversations you could have with people of power that won't listen to me, but will listen to you. I need you to maneuver that way, not the same way I'm shoving. And I think that they become so complacent to feel that if they're standing on the front line with us, that's all you need to do. I need you to use your privilege to gain some access for my people, or give us your resources, right? Don't blindly give money out to organizations that are not doing nothing for my community because you feel your white guilt is getting at you. Get into the community folks that are really doing the work. That's another big problem that we have, right? So to really angle it all in and to just like really make it make sense that when you're out there really truly fighting for people, there are going to be people on a ground level. There are going to be people in the background. There'll be folks that are more radical, pushing position and power. And there are going to be folks that have money. And with all of that, to sustain activism, to create change, what we often forget is money and resources to help support the communities that we're saying we are fighting for. You can't just be an activist and everybody's running around this place not having any resources. That's crazy. That's why a lot of what we've done has fizzled out, because eventually volunteer hours get expired and people got to eat. That's why you see so many times the wrong leadership makes you believe that the only work that has to be done is work on the ground level. And that's totally false. The work on the inside with the policy changers, that's super important. Legislation, laws, these are the things that have to be changed. Talking to those folks who do feel compelled. They don't want to be in the front line. They don't want no press, but they want to be able to support. Figuring out who those people are, who will be able to give money for people so they can pay rent, give food for people so they're not starving, right? When you look at the Black Panthers, how they organize, not only did they organize with self-defense, but some of the programs that we utilize today, right? The food program that exists in so many schools and have been manipulated and stolen from the Black Panthers. They not only activated their activism by showing that, hey, we will defend ourselves, but we will also provide for ourselves. And I think that when you shortchange activism in a way where you're not thinking long term on how we spin and how we change this thing that we're trying to create into more sustainable ways where people can galvanize and be supported and feel there's some real equitable things that we're dealing with, then you're going to have COINTELPRO. Because that's real change. Wait a minute. You niggas aren't coming from our systems? We don't need them. We're doing it ourselves. The activism in this day and age All they got to do is run a play on social media. Because somebody's not going to like what somebody's doing. And instead of somebody picking up the phone, having a conversation face to face, like adults should do, you're going to go have a 3-hour shit session on social media. And you guys are supposed to be working against the same system and fighting against this oppressive system, but you're fighting against yourselves. So COINTELPRO doesn't have to even be utilized. We now see that movements get destroyed just on social media. And that's one thing I have to stress to people. It's not your duty to police how people feel they want to be activists or create change. It is your duty to have conversations if things don't look right and it don't make sense. But if that's their thing, that's their thing. It's not your duty to belittle your own people. Because once they see that kind of dysfunction, the enemy will now easily divide you. And when we get divided, we won't be able to conquer the system that has stayed in power and will continue to stay in power until we find a common ground where we can develop and stay sturdy and stay consistent and not divulge in what we are asking for or the task we want to change. That means that when we when we vote in elected officials, because a lot of them will come and look at what grassroots movements are doing and ask some of us to get on board, we hold them to the fire. The reason why Black people are in the same position that we're in, I've told you about Black leadership. We've had now also bad Black negotiators. They negotiate for the crumbs when most of us say, let's get the whole damn pie. They'll say, well, I'll give you the crumbs, and then we know they'll get a slice. So this idea that seat at the table, more Black faces, I have to dispute all that. Because the reality is, we unfortunately individualize our gains instead of collectively look at our struggle to be our tremendous gain if we all go together. As well as when we talk about activism, if you are strong enough, have the perseverance, the time, and have enough of the passion to create your own organization, I say do so. But if that's not your thing, find a credible organization. I do mean credible, because too many of y'all continue to support undeniably organizations that are no longer credible. They may have done some good work in the beginning, but now find credible organizations that you can be involved with. Organizations that cannot be compromised, organizations that are really about change, and look at their manuscripts of some of the effective things that they've done. How have they moved the needle? Or how haven't they moved the needle? What is their mission statement? What are their goals? What are their wins? What are their losses? And were those losses really losses, or were those lessons? Obtain those things. Just don't fall in love with the characters, right? Just don't fall in love with the simple fact that they may be able to move 300 people for a moment. Because when that moment goes, the work still has to begin. The work still continues. And when I say the work has to begin, because that's the part. The protesting and the marching is one part. The real work happens when it all dies down. How do you move? How do you push for change? How do you activate change when nobody's looking, when no one really cares that it's on your Facebook feed? When someone's saying, oh, you still talking about that? Every single day, the enemy is working to keep us in bondage. They don't take days off. So why, if you think that you're going to start your activism, you believe that you're going to be able to take a day off? It doesn't happen. And I need folks to really understand that activism isn't something that I think you just wake up and just want to do. It's a calling. It's purpose driven, right? And that's why a lot of folks fall off, because you wasn't passionate about this anyway. You wasn't ready to start feeding. We're not talking about feeding homeless people. We're talking about feeding people in the community that might not have got a paycheck for that week or two. We're not talking about giving shoes to people that don't have it. We're talking about people that have to decide shoes or meals. We're not talking about joining campaigns with people that we know is going to win. We're talking about joining campaigns and pushing for those that people don't have no idea who the hell they are, he or she. We're talking about really pushing campaigns and ideas and movements that people will look at you as you're crazy, you're ridiculous, you're stupid, you're too radical. Everything is good. Nah, it's not. You have to be able to embrace the hate. You have to be able to embrace the ridicule. You're going to have to embrace being part of a small collective of people that want to see a system dismantled in every shape, form, or fashion. Reasons why I don't support and pushing needles to my community, because I look at that as a strategy. Because if you're going to push needles to my community, why weren't you pushing health care in my community? Why weren't you promoting businesses in my community that look like me? Why haven't you addressed the violence in my community, the education system in my community? You've addressed none of these systems that have been killing us, but you want to address poking my community with a needle. I won't be that individual who's activating his activism for a needle. Whether I'm wrong or right about that, I still believe in choice that a person should have. Not suggesting they do, because the same system that we attempted to overthrow just last year turns around and now says we're unhealthy. Take the needle. We got to look at that type of stuff. It may not be everyone's in everyone's peripheral view, but you just got to ask, and you got to always question. Why does one community have more than the other community? Why do we continue to fight the same battles that our ancestors fought way before us? Why? We have to continuously question systems that have relatively not given a collective of us what we've asked for. So again, activism is a lot more than marching and protesting, right? You can be a quiet activist by moving and maneuvering inside some of those state buildings, right? Or funneling money to help support, or be in the background on a social media campaign. But activism is a lot more difficult, and there's a lot more things attached to it than just showing up and saying I'm a community activist. What community do you support? What community do you represent? And my thing is this: if you're fighting for Black people and you consider yourself an activist and ain't no Black people showing up, are you truly fighting for Black people, or are you fighting for somebody else? You have to be able to engage those people that you claim that you're fighting for. Because if they don't show up, it don't mean a damn thing at the end of the day. So, you know, I say that with all grace and humbleism, if that's a word, but I'll use that as my new word, humbleism. So if there's any questions, any critiques, any conversation, I like to not just talk at people. I like to have some dialogue back and forth.
I don't know why she texted to me, but Mariah, go ahead and ask him your question.
Yeah, ask me a question. Don't be afraid.
I forgot which campaign it was, Miss Lorraine. But So recently, I was a part of a press conference for addressing why EGSD like had the Confederate flags like in the teachers' classrooms, and I knew you had a similar one along with KCRA.
Yes, ma'am.
That one. My
Yes.
question is, when you talk about advocating, and me particularly, I advocate for Black students in the classroom, Black safety, security, and a place to like be comfortable enough to share. I want to know why there was lack of student representation in your um, campaign.
You said, why was it for me?
Yes.
I believe
Meaning,
she's talking about the Kit Carson press.
yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. But what I'm trying to figure out what was the standpoint of why it was, as if the representation of the youth was it? Are you saying that was a bad thing? What are you trying to say?
Just lack of student representation. Like, was it hard to find students who were in the classroom and like compelled enough to speak up and be comfortable and supported enough to speak up?
Okay. No, that's more clear. That's more clear. Here's the problem. It takes a lot of courage to stand up and talk and speak out against anything that can come back and haunt you and you can get backlash from, right? You don't know after you stand up against the system, because I'm gonna tell you truthfully, until it became a trending thing about Black people's plight here, especially here in Sacramento, I was blackballed, ostracized, called too radical, all kind of different things I was subjected to. And even from my own peers that claim that they were in the same position of fight. Because once you start exposing things, then you're open for any retaliation that the people who deem to feel like you're going against the grain, that you come against all of that. So in that moment, we had to move fast because, see, when you're able to galvanize like a story, and I do that often, there's been a lot of major stories that I've been behind the scenes, and that's a part of activism. You could create content, be able to push it to other people, and get certain media avenues to make it a bigger story. And so folks will get that awareness. In that moment, you have to understand something. The teacher had already done what she done 2 weeks prior. She was still at the school until I opened and broke the case and it got on the media airways and people started talking about it. That's why they eventually, on the Tuesday of that week, because the first few media outlets reported on it on Monday, and now they kept on getting more and more media attention and more calls. By Tuesday, they sat there and said, hey, we need to take you off of, the summer program because it's too hot right now. I don't know if they said those exact words, but I know they got her off the school. So she could not be exposed, questioned, or they couldn't look crazy and they could feel like we're handling the situation. But I clearly want to remind you guys, she was still working. So when we had a whole bunch of youth now coming forward, speaking about all other things outside of just the teacher doing what she did, do you know how many young people I said, hey, stand with us? They didn't want to do it. I can't force them. They still go to the school. They were afraid. They didn't want to talk. I had to convince one of the parents and the child that was actually in the class when the woman gave a apology to get online, and they say they will do it only if they don't show my face. So just because you know you're in the right, they make you feel like you're in the wrong. So when we did the press conference, that press conference was more or less to rally up community leadership as well as the teachers in that school who have been talking and saying they were uncomfortable on how the whole situation was handled. And it was open for any young person to join us. A few did. As you saw, one of the young men spoke out because he was encouraged and he felt empowered. But that's the problem. When you are powerless and you don't feel empowered, and you feel that every time when you speak out, you're batted down, and you feel like you're wrong for speaking out, why would you choose to speak out? So not everybody has that courageous bone like you, Miss Mariah, that says, hey, I don't care about what the backlash and what's going to happen afterwards. What's going to be my consequences afterwards? It's wrong. It's wrong. Back in the days, you know what they used to do to people like you and me? They used to kill us. Them niggas is talking too much. Kill them or throw them to jail. Now, the reason why it's changed is because you give a few folks who are quote unquote activists, give them some notoriety, give them a spotlight, put some money in their pocket, make them feel relevant, and you ain't even got to kill the revolution. You just pay the people that was moving the needle for the revolution. We ain't even got to kill them or throw them in jail. So that's the reason why there was no real representation of young people, though there was a few scattered out there while the folks were having all the cameras on us. They were there with their families, right? But if you don't have leadership that's willing to move the needle, like in your school or like in their school, we can help support that. But at the same time, that's why, again, I say, activate your activism. You, as a young youth leader, have to sit there and say, hey, I'm willing to move forward. I just need some support. And that's when other folks like ourselves, Ms. Pryor, we come in to support that. But a lot of times, people are in fear of the backlash and the consequences that they're going to face. Does that answer your question?
Definitely. Thank you.
I thank you. I appreciate that. And I thank you for breaking it down so I could understand the immediate question. And I'm going to tell you, young people, there's been a lot of great movements that fizzled out. I mean, I was a part of helping the young people shut down the mall in 2019, during the Stephon Clark, second half of Stephon Clark. I was one of the leaders that shut down Golden One, one of the main leaders that helped organize that shutdown. That wasn't a Black Lives Matter shutdown, though it was a Black Lives Matter march. It was other organizers outside of Black Lives Matter, myself and some other folks, that shut the Golden One down, and it just became a thing. The second time around had nothing to do with it. But I'll tell you one thing, the second time around, because some other folks did it, they thought it was still be a part of it, and I use that as leverage. So have the ability to understand that when you're pushing back against the system, when you get your leverage power, don't let it go. And the one wrong thing I did is I let my leverage power go because I created a more bigger collective. In hindsight, looking back, I would have never done that. I would have just controlled it. Because again, bad negotiators are sometimes our Achilles heel in the Black community. I was a part of getting the police chief as well as the supervisor in Sausalito fired. What is Golden One? Golden One is the arena where the Sacramento Kings play. Of course, you don't know what Golden One is because the Sacramento Kings ain't no good. So who would recognize the Golden One arena, right? We ain't went to a playoff since I don't know when. We ain't went to a playoffs since we were at Arco Arena. So that's the Golden One arena down there in downtown Sacramento. I was a part of getting some Sausalito officers fired as one of the Sausalito officers harassed some of my good friends who own a business, Yama, out there in Sausalito, black-owned business. Of course, a black person shouldn't. The black person's. I'll get to the shutdown in a second, Queen. Of course, black people are not to have businesses in downtown Sausalito, so they got harassed. The moment went viral. Me and some of my team out there in Marin, the Trap the Vote team, we organized. We shut down the police department, and then turned around with that shutdown. We put immense pressure on the police folks over there, and those officers were out of there in the next 2 weeks. But so in activism, there is wins. Now, why did we shut down Golden One? Well, the whole part of that whole shutdown and how it happened was the beginning of like mass protests in 2018 because of the shooting of Stephon Clark. We had approached and shut down the highway. We pretty much shut down City Hall. We marched from the highways after shutting that down for hours and navigated down the street, down the downtown area. Just probably 1,000 people at that particular time, just moving and marching and screaming and yelling and causing ruckus downtown Sac. So when the march was supposed to end, a majority of folks went back to Golden One. A lot of us decided to take over Sauce. That's right connected to Golden One, and turned around. And I was walking and I was looking at people as I was walking by Golden One. I was like, wouldn't that be fun? I guess, I don't know. Excuse me for my ideas of fun during those times, right? Wouldn't it be interesting to shut down Golden One? So as we were in Sauce, kind of exhausting that that establishment, I screamed out, "Hey, let's go to Golden One." And the rest was history. As a lot of us navigated and we moved and started locking hands. And I never thought that it would be possible. I thought that the first time we even tried to pull it off, we'd go to jail. As soon as we said people aren't coming inside, it didn't happen. And I knew, and I don't know, a lot of people really understood it. Maybe a few of us did. Economically, that would create a immediate reaction to what we wanted to get a reaction from the people in a higher power. Because what I do understand, when I go back to the Montgomery boycotts, once you interfere economically in a system, and some folks were like, what does the Sacramento Kings have to do with a system? Shoot, Sacramento Kings, you know how much tax revenue that is? Do you know how much money the Sacramento Kings probably make? And we're not even talking about ticket sales. We're talking about beer, merchandise, right? Food, right? The advertising dollars that they're getting because they're supposed to have a game. They lose all that money. They don't benefit. So automatically, you start interfering with that part, people are going to automatically pay attention and start saying, hey, how can we solve? How can we help? How can we support? And by that time, you get allyship. But I want you guys to be very aware of that allyship. That allyship only comes because they don't want you to ever disrupt their game again. They don't care about what's going on. They don't want you to economically shift their position. What you have to keep honest is why they wanted to support. Not because we shut down the game, but what real change do they want to do? And I'll sit there and say the Sacramento Kings aren't really official like they claim to be. I'll just say that. Any other questions? Don't be afraid. I don't bite. Hand raised. Is that you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah. I just okay. So for BYLP right now in AGSD, like we've been trying to implement like BYLP centers and just more Black student sanctioned supports. And it kind of feels like our clock keeps being reset. We keep being pushed back. And I'm having a really hard time because as a student leader, like I'm a senior now, and it's like every time I try to inch for my community, for my Black students to feel more comfortable and less tensive and less targeted on our campuses, I keep seeing the data about how we're, the highest disciplinary rates. And it's just like really hard. Like, what advice would you give to like keep being motivated to push forward, even though like, of course I have constant reassurance from Miss Lorraine, like, it's okay, like we got to bring it up at our board meetings, but it's like, I'd be responding to these board meetings. I'd be applying pressure. And it's like, what?
Hey, Mariah, me and Miss Pryor, we needed you like 5-7 years ago. You know what? That's the constant fight, right? As I've told you before, I remember going back to supporting the young people shutting down the mall, as well as supporting the young people doing one of the bigger marches that we had in Sacramento, the walkout, the high school walkout, and how that was, and seeing how much power came from that, but just watching it just dissipate. Like the second time it was done, it wasn't as effective. And the thing about it is people burn out. The thing about it is we have folks live their lives, right? Eventually people see the patterns. They don't see the wins. So when you're in activism, if you are all about, I'm going to win every time, you're sorely mistaken, because it's not going to necessarily happen, right? And sometimes you're just going to have to go with 3 or 4 people, and that's going to be the fight until everybody else wakes up and picks up the baton. And I'll say that because how many days and nights that we called out against a system that nobody here in Sacramento wanted to recognize. Literally, I remember talking to the mayor before he became a mayor and challenging him and asking him, what are you going to do for Black people? And he kept on talking about youth. I said, I ain't talking about youth. Black people, infrastructure, businesses, job development, all this stuff. We really got into a real heated argument. And now here he is as a mayor, years later, having to deal with the same problem that I told him he had to recognize. Why? Because nobody else was having him even look at that, because it wasn't a space of conversation. So clearly what you're dealing with right now isn't a space of conversation. You have to continually be consistent to make sure that's a space of conversation. And you cannot really care about who is fighting that fight with you. That's why when we have our youth leaders, you have to hook up and connect with individuals like myself, Ms. Pryor, and a few others that are ready to help you guys fight. But in these moments, you still have to be the major voice. But that's when we come in to be that major support. Because unfortunately, you talk about you're a senior, you got kids that are other seniors, you got kids that are juniors, you got kids that got scholarships on the line, you got individuals that are just like, I got home issues to deal with. And then you got a lot of people like, yo, I got to make some money. I ain't got time to be playing all these games. And in reality, some people just don't think that this system is ever going to change to benefit them. But I always say this, you keep fighting consistently. You don't waver. You keep fighting. You make sure that they know your name every time you walk in. I can't tell you how many times I had to make them recognize who the hell Barry Accius is. I've lost friends. I've been ridiculed, as I've said before. I've been blackballed in ways with even other activists because the way I activated my activism wasn't the way they did. And I'm okay with that. I'm an unapologetic Black man. I don't compromise for nobody. I don't compromise for no system. I'm strategic more than I'm emotional, even though these things will catch you in an emotional state at times. You have to have the willingness and fight to know that you are going to pass down this fight for somebody else. But how you leave the fight makes it better for them to fight an easier fight. So how we leave this earth, how we leave our legacy, I know that what I've done moved the needle. But you got to make sure you consistently move the needle. Yes, it was going to be frustrating. Yes, you're going to believe that this is all for nothing. Yes, you're going to be mad. Yes, you're going to want to give up. Yes, you will give up. But you keep on fighting. Because you always got to remember, the same fights you and I fight on other sides, our ancestors gave their life. Some of them, not willingly. So just keep that in mind. And figure out more strategic strategies. Instead of showing up all the time, get letters. If that's not working, who's the individual in the district that you can go talk to about some of the different things that are happening in the school? Where is the superintendent? Start writing letters, showing up at their front door. Sometimes you gotta change your battle tactics. When we started showing up at that city council meeting consistently, causing ruckus every single Tuesday, and any special time they felt they wanted to go ahead and do a city council meeting, we were there, we were motivated, and we weren't taking no ish. So that right there, you might want to just look at it and change your strategy. Carter? Any other questions? Did I handle that? Does that give you a fuller picture, Mariah?
Yes, I'm definitely going to be reevaluating my strategy on how I approach things.
Because you can't approach things, even though these are emotional issues, you can't approach it with an emotional lens. Getting frustrated every time something doesn't go your way, right? And if that answer, you're not getting it from those people, you got to remember, even the principal is a small fry. He works for somebody. He has to answer for somebody, right? Look at the superintendent. Look at some of the union reps. Attack it at a different angle, right? Yes, activism isn't for the faint of heart. That's why I tell folks, why do you really want to be an activist? Just because it looks good? It looks good. It seems like activists are getting paid. You know, the only reason why I can make money is because I have already had my own organization. I created my own nonprofit before I even really truly jumped into activism. So that's what I talk about, creating an organization. And I have so many different programs that not only am I able to support myself, my own family, but I'm also able to hire young people as well as young adults. And that's a form of activism when you're able to not only feed your community, you create opportunities. You know, because the only way we truly apply pressure is when we're showing how we apply pressure, not just in a way of march, march, march. Some of the greatest things have been done behind closed doors. Trust me when I tell you that. Some three-way conversations, some letters being wrote, a social media campaign. All of that yelling at the police, screaming at them, remember, they ain't the ones that's going to change the policies. The politician makers are. They're not going to change the heart of this system. Remember, y'all, the police are the pawns to the game. They are the miniature zombies of the overlord. They are nobodies on this chessboard, but we pay so much attention to them because they are the thing that we can physically touch, we see, and we always see their actions. But I'm going to tell you, the actions that are always greater than the police are the people that are controlling them. And they're the ones that create the laws and the policies that we're trying to systematically dismantle. So, Mariah, when you talk about you need some support, you got my back. I got your back, girl. Let me know what kind of play you want me to help you run. And then we can go ahead and work some victories. Because it would be great to have all people simultaneously, especially Black people, who it's constantly happening to, all get together. But I understand fatigue factors. I've been in those moments before. And I'm a little bit older now. This is my life work. This is my purpose work. So it's different for me. I know that if I die today by the hands or the bullets of the oppressor or of my own people, I've left good work. So I don't fear that, right? I'm not worried about clubbing or hanging out. This is my life work. And I always feel a lot better when I'm putting some strain and some frustration to some white person that feel their privilege is going to get them out of some of this work that we got. So count me in on some of that battle, as well as I got some soldiers to help support. So just this conversation that you had with me helps you now align yourself with a few more ready people that's ready to get there and get dirty and say, let's work.
Facts, because I think she met Tyler when he came to the press conference because we were out of town. So I definitely think that we need to make that happen and do some things collectively. I know we both have separate organizations, but it's time to stop operating in silos and really like pushing the needle from both ends, because I'm more of the policy person, but got it. Well, we thank you, sir. We appreciate you.
I appreciate y'all.
In the time. What I've been telling the other presenters is sometimes you just got to start. Tyler was so cool. Sometimes you just got to start calling on these folks, because these youngsters, although they're listening, sometimes you have to grab them and pull them into the conversation because they're listening. And I know that they were taking notes. So thank you so much for taking your time to be with them and be with us this afternoon.
No, like I said, I appreciate, it's always great watching, because, you and I started at the same time with our organizations, and watching them both propel into great heights of what we've wanted. I mean, when we had to kind of beg kids to come to programs, and sometimes even try to coerce kids to know that there's really impact in what we're doing. Now it's not even a forced thing. It's like we have too many kids on the waiting list that want to be involved, and not enough of a structured capacity and facility, right? And that's what we have to do. We have to talk about infrastructure. That's revolutionary, right? Where's the safe spaces for Black kids? And I think that needs to be one of the asks that we have, because everybody else got it. And that's also pushing in to those people that are Black that have money that can help build it for us.
100%. And
all right, so love always. Keep the good fight. I'm here. Let's get to work.
Let's do it. All right. Thank you.
So, peace.